Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at MS Dynamics World. On this episode, we are talking about Visa's Commercial Enhanced Data Program, or CEDP, and its impact on merchants. CEDP's critical enforcement dates are quickly approaching, and when it's in effect, it will quickly have important implications for merchants in terms of fees and data quality. This episode is sponsored by PayTrace, and my guests, Sam Johnson and Jeremy Bogart of PayTrace, tell me about the work their team has done to help merchants become verified for CEDP and avoid any negative effects of non-compliance with the data quality requirements. Sam and Jeremy share some guidance for merchants to know if they are affected by the new program and qualification changes, and we also talk about some of the PayTrace team's plans in the community coming up. All right, I am here with Sam and Jeremy. Welcome to both of you. Could we maybe just start with a bit of an introduction from each of you for our listeners who maybe haven't heard you on the podcast or haven't seen you present in the past? Sam Johnson, welcome to you first. Can you give us a little intro?
Definitely, Jason. Thanks for having us. My name's Sam Johnson. I am the Partner Success Manager with PayTrace. Been here for about a decade. So thanks for having us.
Yeah, great to have you. And Jeremy, welcome back.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. I'm Jeremy Bogart. I run the product team here at PayTrace. Been in the Dynamics community for, about 20 years now. Getting to be an old hardened member.
Emphasis on old. No, I'm kidding.
Unfair. But
my kids would certainly say so.
Yeah, I know the feeling. So, great to have you both. And we were going to talk about something that I'm interested to learn a lot more about today. Something that's really kind of rolling out right around this time, and that's CEDP, or Commercial Enhanced Data Program from Visa. Yeah, why don't we just start with a bit of the basics? What is it, and how does it differ from previous Level 2 and Level 3 interchange programs?
I'll hop in on this one, Jason, just by ways of introducing this program, realizing this is a little different than your normal Microsoft conversation, but this is going to have a potentially large impact to a lot of Dynamics users. To take a step back before getting into CEDP, I do want to talk about this program that Visa and MasterCard have called Level 2 and Level 3 processing. It's been around for decades, and probably a lot of users and anybody that accepts credit card may be taking advantage of this now, knowingly or unknowingly. And really what this program is intended to do is on business-to-business credit card transactions. Businesses or merchants have the ability to supply extra data, enhanced data, summary data, and line item detail on their credit card transactions. That goes out to the card brands, to Visa, to MasterCard. And what they do is when they receive that data, if they like what they see, they will essentially reduce the rates that you pay for accepting that credit card, right? Which can be as high as somewhere between 3 and 4%, can be significant savings all the way down to or below 2%. For the cost of accepting that credit card. And like I said, this has been around for a long time. What's happened, though, is, especially with the advancement of technology, not much has changed with these programs over the last few decades. And now that we have these AI tools, machine learning, things like that, what Visa's doing is they're essentially scrubbing the data and ensuring the validity of it. They believe that there's been kind of a saturation of maybe dummy data or less than accurate information that's being passed on to them. So they're creating this program called CEDP, Commercial Enhanced Data Program, essentially taking a good look through machine learning at the data that they're receiving on these card transactions and saying, hey, yes, this looks good, or no, this is just a bunch of ones and zeros that somebody's plugging in as a placeholder. This is not good data. You're not going to get the rate savings. So with that said, this is taking effect. They've been working on this they announced it last year, really with the intention of reducing the fraud on these credit card transactions and getting a lot more accurate information that they can then, pass on to the cardholders, the people actually making these purchases. So kind of an interesting program that could have an effect on a lot of people's bottom dollars if they are accepting credit cards today.
And what are the timelines and enforcement dates for CEDP? What are the implications for merchants and partners as they reach those points in time?
Yeah. So, like I said, this was announced last year. So it's not a new thing. But especially the reason why we're talking about it right now in third quarter of 25 is new rates can start going into effect mid-October. So earlier this spring, back in April, Visa officially started analyzing the information and verifying businesses, verifying merchants, saying that, yes, the data that you're sending is good, or essentially not verifying that the information's good. There hasn't been any implications on what the rates that they're paying have up until now. So come mid-October, these new rates go into effect. And like I said, if businesses right now are paying 1.9% on their credit card fees because they've been getting level 3, if they're not under this verified flag mid-October and they're still trying to get those level 3 rates, their rates could potentially, we expect them to go all the way up as high as Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong, about 3.3% on that total cost, essentially raising their credit card expense by 1 to 1.25%. So that's rolling out here shortly. And we expect there's going to be some more changes next year. Next April, Visa's actually eliminating or moving over what their level 2 program. That's all going to level 3. So like I said, there's going to be a lot of changes here in the very near future.
All right. Yeah. Well, let's bring Jeremy back in here. Jeremy, how does CEDP affect interchange qualification, funding timing, and reconciliation processes for merchants?
Yeah, I think I'll just build on what Sam was talking about a little bit and go a little bit farther. I'd say, if you're listening to this and your company accepts credit cards, hopefully you've heard of this before and it's not a surprise. If it is, now would be the time to go check and make sure that, you are going to be compliant with the program. And so what does this mean essentially? For interchange qualification, funding timing, reconciliation, it's changing quite a bit depending on how the program works. So I want to talk a little bit about how you're in the program and how you get into it. So essentially, anybody, who's doing B2B credit card acceptance, so anybody who's accepting cards, who's running a business system, who's probably listening to this call, fits into this program. And whether they knew it or not, we're participating in level 2 and level 3 most likely. Many gateways, many providers already send the data through. So if you're integrated, your provider might already send it. If they don't, there were a lot of people who were sending, very generic data to qualify for these programs, which is essentially why Visa has, kind of made the standards a little bit more rigorous with this program. And so that old program is going away. So you need to make sure that you are ready to go with the new one. So what that means is Visa essentially evaluates the data that you're sending in. So the first step is making sure that your provider, both from a software perspective, so whoever you're using to integrate to Dynamics or whatever gateway that you're using, supports sending, level 2, level 3 data, and that, whoever is your merchant account supplier is your MSP is looking at your verified status. So Visa is sending out essentially is this merchant verified or not to whoever the MSP is, whoever the acquirer is. And so that is your idea of whether you're verified or not. And so Visa basically looks at, they say 10 to 15 days worth of transactions, and they validate that those transactions are valid. And if they are, they will put you into the verified status. And so until you're verified, you're not going to be getting level 3 rates. So if you're not prepared, if you're not sending level 3 data, if your providers aren't ready, it's a good thing to just go validate with whoever your MSP is, your merchant services provider, that you are verified. And they should be getting that on a report from Visa. So that's really the first step. You want to make sure that you're doing that, because essentially what happens, we're used to basically next day settlement to level 3 rates. So if you were getting, your level 3 rates, Sam outlined, 1.8 plus minus, whatever it ends up being per card, that doesn't happen quite the same way anymore. So first they check to see if you're verified. If you're verified, then you end up in the CEDP rates, and you should see pretty much the same thing that you're used to seeing. In fact, there's actually a rate cut for level 3 transactions of about, 15 basis points or so. So for those who are prepared, and really companies that we work with by and large, are benefiting from this program change, although it has more requirements, you should see a pretty normal process. If you are not yet verified, or if you're in the process of verification, come October 17th, when the rate tables change, you'll basically be in arrears until you are verified. So Visa will hold that interchange until you're verified, that kind of 15-day window. And if you are verified, you will get a rebate. If you're not, that, you'll basically stay at the rate that you were charged. So it's fairly important to, talk to your MSP, verify if you are verified or not. So make sure that you have that flag and make sure that whoever you're talking to knows what you're asking for. And in the intermediate process, basically put some processes in place at your business that says, I really want to monitor that daily batch settlement and make sure that I am qualifying at the rate I expected. And if I believe I should be verified, keeping track of what you believe the difference should be to make sure that you are caught up on it eventually. So there are not a lot of automated processes yet across the different payments providers for this. The tooling is pretty new. This program is fairly new. And so I think it's a good idea for merchants as well to be aware of how much they're paying and how much they believe they should be paying and keeping an eye on it as they go through that verification process. So for our merchants, for example, the merchants have been able to be verified since April of this year. And so if you've been sending transactions through and all the data is supplied, you should already be verified. So hopefully this is just a, check the box, make sure, yes, we're good to go. But if you're not, or if you're struggling to figure out why, then you're definitely going to want to make sure that you have that conversation with your MSP and also maybe put some processes in place on the back end to reconcile what you think you should be getting versus what you got and making sure you're being made whole kind of in that 2-week time period.
All right. So you've talked about, obviously the benefits of it in terms of the rates you're getting. Are there other benefits or are there other consequences that we should be talking about before we move on?
Yeah, I think that the benefits here are largely around, better rates. So 15 basis points, it ends up to be about net 10 basis points after, the CEDP program itself has a 5 basis point fee that's assessed on the front end. So the net ends up being about 10. But that's the overall upside. The downside is certainly the, increased compliance burden, making sure that you're sending good transactions, verifying that you're getting into the program, those sorts of things. But by and large, most of the merchants here listening are going to have fairly integrated solution that should be sending data in the first place. So hopefully, all those things clear. And then in that case, you're not really doing much more than you were before, and you are getting a slightly better rate. So, for B2B merchants, like most of the people here listening probably are, it's a net benefit. I think the Visa put the program in place to really cut down on level 3 qualification for transactions that didn't really qualify, for merchants who weren't really doing B2B, for transactions that weren't really B2B. And so this will have a fairly large impact, but I expect the impact to be fairly low to the audience here.
Yeah, I'll echo what you just said, Jeremy, right? Like, especially I would assume a lot of people that are aware of level 3 processing and what that program has been historically. Many of the people on this call are probably in some case manually entering that information, which if you're doing that, you can still do that. That's not changing. And the data that's on these transactions, right? If you're doing this through your native ERP system, you should already have invoice line item detail. So we do expect disruption on that to be minimal. But if you are using, some other type of program where maybe there was some sort of data automation that was being plugged in on the back end, that is something that you are going to want to be aware of. Just to reiterate what Jeremy mentioned, check your statements, see what you're paying now. Come November, see what you're paying then. If there is a big discrepancy, there's probably going to be some CEDP implication that's saying, hey, we need to take a look at what you're doing and make sure that you are sending in the information in the way that Visa wants you to. Because while the benefit of doing this properly and not having disruption is positive, the consequence or the negative side of things that if you're not meeting these new CEDP requirements can make a huge financial implication to your business, right? This could be in the form of, 100 basis point swing more or less. So that could be tens of thousands of dollars that essentially you're going to be paying in credit card fees for not doing anything differently than what you were previously.
Let's talk a bit more specifically about data elements that are required now for level 3 transactions under CEDP, and how rigorous are those validation standards from Visa?
So level 3 transactions, level 3 data, previously what Visa looked for was mostly, is the field filled out? Does it have, it could be zeros in there. It could be, really anything else. And level 3 data is really invoice data. So, any of the audience here who knows what an invoice looks like, you're essentially sending invoice data to Visa. So you're sending line items, you're sending tax amounts, header, total, subtotals, discounts, those sorts of things. And so previously, whether or not you sent the actual values or not, Visa didn't specify. It just really looked at whether it was filled out or not in certain situations. And so what they've essentially done is enforce, basic invoice standards. So does the math add up? Do the line items add up to the total? Do the taxes add up? Do the taxes add up to the total as well? And that sort of a thing. The other big one, and I think Sam mentioned this a little bit, with the talk of AI, is they're looking for line items that are aligned to the business and add more value. There are a lot of line items in different software packages that were passed in as generic descriptions or passed in as the merchant name, or they weren't real line items, so to speak. So they are using some AML models to make sure that the line items look like they're legitimate as well. So it's a combination of, are you sending us real line items? Does it look like a real invoice? Does all the math work on the back end? That's really what they're looking at overall. So they're going to be basically constantly monitoring these transactions, making sure that the math works and making sure that the line items are real. And so even after you're verified, they can look back at transactions and they have a look back period where they can adjust interchange after the fact as well, which is something they've always been able to do, but just we didn't see it very often. So we expect that to be a little bit more prevalent as well. So back to the reconciliation and making sure that you're watching during this period, it would be a good thing to have kind of in general to make sure that you're not getting dinged for valid transactions. I expect there's going to be a lot of noise when this starts. Visa's doing a lot more than they used to be doing. They're doing a lot of checking, and hopefully it's mostly we're getting not a lot of false positives as well, or false negatives where you're sending good data and it just doesn't they don't believe it for whatever reason. So hopefully all that's working well and you have a process to check for it. But again, as long as you're passing your invoice data in and validating that invoice data is getting passed in, it isn't getting sub for default somewhere in your technology stack, which absolutely could happen in the wrong scenarios. So I think it's really just about, again, validating and making sure you're in the program.
And Jeremy, if I can just interject here, right? We've mentioned this look back period a couple times and potential rebates on the rate qualification and things like that. I don't want to overstep. You're more the product guy, but do we have an idea on what that looks like with the card brands and what that, are they working directly with the merchants on those rebates? Are they working with the processors?
Yeah,
what can these merchants expect from that?
So it's really at the acquirer level. So they'll be giving rebates. If anyone wants to get super technical, these are TC20 messages that they send back to the acquirer. They've always been there for edits. If any of the rules previously were being hit, they could downgrade a transaction after the fact. So that still exists now. They've just added new scenarios where that can happen. And so just like if you've ever experienced downgrades in the past, what happens is, that will be taken out at the acquirer level and be removed. On the rebate level, essentially the same thing will happen, but in reverse. So the acquirer will get that interchange rebate and then forward it on to you, essentially. So the tricky part will be making sure that you can make sure that the transactions you think are qualifying are in that overall number and deposit. So Visa does send back the transactions that they're refunding and the amounts. So the detail does exist if you want to go get it. Make sure that you can get it from your acquirer if you want to go down to that level, or see what tools they have to help you in that reconciliation process.
When it comes to how merchants are maybe reacting to this, do you get many questions, or are you hearing questions being asked of, let's say, a Visa about, how they're using machine learning, how they're going to verify merchant data quality, and anything else about that you're hearing or that listeners should know?
We get a lot of questions about it for sure, from both resellers and from merchants. And, by and large, it's an area that I think most people didn't pay a ton of attention to. The whole level 3 qualification kind of took it for granted. And so I think there's a lot of kind of getting up to speed on what it all means and, whether you qualify or not. So we get a fair amount of, what does it take? What do I have to do? Fortunately for our customers, it's a fairly straightforward conversation about the things that need to happen and how it's supported. But from Visa, we'll say it's a developing area. They have specs that are in place, but a lot of the detailed questions are going a little bit unanswered. There's a little bit of we'll see for exactly how those transactions will go through. A lot of we'll see for, are there new transaction types so we can easily filter and decide what's a refund or an interchange, this or that, to make it easier on the back end. So, even the larger players I've talked to as well, are getting a little bit of vague answers on the details. At the same time, I think they're trying to make sure their systems aren't gamed in any way as well. So I can see where they're coming from a little bit. But like I said, there's a fair amount of uncertainty as this program goes into place. When we look at it, this thing has gone live in less than a year, which is a fairly large change to get done in a year, just from a getting everybody in the entire technology stacks to comply to these changes, to understand them. Then there's all the operational impacts. So from the back end, on the payment side, there's been a lot of conversation with the players trying to figure out the details, but some of it is going to get figured out as we roll live as well with Visa and make sure that, we're always in good communication. But, some of the details I think we're going to figure out as we go live.
Yeah, I can imagine still a few tough questions to ask, or as people get more familiar with what it all entails, right? I want to go back to something you touched on, Jeremy, and that was sort of what organizations' technology stacks look like. And that kind of brings us to, ERP users and partners. What steps should they be taking right now to ensure that their systems and integrations can support CEDP?
Yeah, I think it's really having a conversation with all of your players and making sure you understand, what data is making it through to Visa, making sure that, your ERP integration is sending, your full data with your orders and invoices on through, making sure that that goes through your gateway and into the processor the way that you expect. Again, the ultimate, green flag for that is, are you in verified or not? If you're not, then I think you've got to start asking some hard questions at each point there and making sure you understand kind of exactly what's happening. For PayTrace users, it's pretty straightforward. We're sending that data through the gateway and then through to the processor. So, our merchants can certainly reach out, and the ones that we support directly, and we can tell them if they're verified or not and help them through that process. So I think it's just a matter of having a conversation with your providers and making sure that, you understand the broad strokes of the program and kind of what you're looking for. And hopefully you've got a little bit of that here. And then making sure that you ultimately are getting to that verified status.
Yeah, I think the great thing about this audience in particular is in the ERP space, this group is set up for the best chance of success. Like Jeremy mentioned earlier, all the information that the card brands want is going to be that invoice level data. And with that, with the types of transactions that we're seeing that are being processed through ERPs, you have all the data there already. It's like Jeremy says, we need to make sure that the data that you're receiving is also getting remitted out to the card brands through the processing networks, that it's going to the right place so that you can get the benefit of that from a payment processing perspective. It is going to be the ones that are the non-integrated ones, which we do have a decent amount of users on, that, there might be a little bit more work needed where you're having to make sure all that data is being sent in because you're not necessarily getting that invoice level data on every single transaction. So yeah, for this one, hopefully very minimal disruption, but definitely, I can't say start looking a month ago, but start looking now as these changes and new rates start going into effect.
Yeah, and I mean, it certainly strengthens the overall message that I think most ERP, users have been hearing for a long time, that, improving the automation of their end-to-end processes and improving their invoice management. I mean, all of those elements, in addition to payment processing, are so critical as the world sort of moves forward with things like this. Maybe we could talk a little bit more about PayTrace and some of the operational procedures and technology enhancements that you put in place to respond to CEDP.
Yeah. Like I said, for the ERP integrated, like Sam pointed out, there's not a lot, right? They've already done the hard work of integrating their systems, and then that rich data can be, easily sent on to the processors. So, hopefully there's not a whole lot of overhead there for users who are primarily using our virtual terminal. Essentially, you've seen us add tools to kind of beef up the invoicing data that gets sent. So, we previously didn't have a strong invoice creation capability, and you've seen us add to that with, the addition of product lists. So being able to have your products directly in the gateway. So if you're running in a disconnected fashion, you can get your products in there to be sent on to the processor. And so that's really, from that side, it's essentially either you're sending an invoice from the ERP, directly, or, you're having to get that invoice data, manually into the gateway and sent on to the processor. So, hopefully for most of our merchants here, it's a pretty integrated process and don't have to worry about it as much, but we do have those tools in the gateway as well.
Thinking about where we are in time here, I imagine, given the upcoming changes that are rolling out imminently and the interest this has for pretty much any merchant that's running a Dynamics ERP, you're going to be out in the world at Summit, or your team is, I should say, which is coming up later in the October timeframe. I imagine you'll be ready to talk about CEDP while you're there.
Yes, absolutely. So myself, Sam, and Jeremy are both going to be there, along with, I think, about a dozen of our team at Summit this year. We are going to be in booth 1315. If you were out at Summit last year, you probably saw our gigantic arch. We're going to have our big, bright PayTrace arch again, with some masseuses. So if you want to come drop by and chat with us about CEDP and get a massage while you're at it, definitely, we'd love to have that conversation. We're going to have all of our product experts there, our payments experts. And we're also going to have, like I said before, we are integrated directly into BC. We also have a lot of non-integrated clients that we've met at some of these events that are, ERP users. They're Microsoft Dynamics users, but they're using PayTrace as a standalone option, which is great. We love that as well. But we do have some really great solutions within Microsoft Dynamics natively as well. So definitely drop by our booth at Summit. We'd love to have that conversation.
All right, excellent. Yeah, anything else that you want to, mention or call attention to before we wrap up here?
I think we covered a lot. We've got a lot of information out there on the internet. We've been posting about CEDP pretty ad nauseum for the last few months. So if you want to do a little bit more research, we've got tons of information on our blog. We also do have a lot of kind of short, quick hit videos and even some longer form webinars that Jeremy and I have done over the last couple months, which are on our YouTube channel. So do a quick search within the YouTube for PayTrace. We'd love for you to subscribe to that as well. We do have lots of really great content just around payment processing and then specifically around the ERP space as we start providing some more solutions and building out some of our products there. So definitely check that out. And we'd also love to get some feedback. If you're a current customer, if you're looking around for different solutions, please reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you.
All right. Well, I want to thank you both for being here. It was great to get a chance to learn more about how your outlook on CEDP has evolved as the program has sort of come to this point where it's sort of imminently rolling out. And it was great for me to get a chance to learn a bit more about the challenges and the opportunities of it as well. So thanks to both of you for being here.
Thanks again, Jason.
Yeah, thanks, Jason.
This has been another episode of the MSDW podcast. My thanks once again to Sam and Jeremy for joining me. Once again, you can connect with PayTrace at Summit at booth 1315. You can also visit them online. We will post links to their site as well as their YouTube channel and blog. And that's it for this episode. If you want to get in touch with me, you can send me an email, jason@msdynamicsworld.com. For all of our updates, you can also follow us on LinkedIn. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World, signing off.